Ben, welcome back to Director's Notes.
Yes, thank you for having me.
No, you're welcome. And we are here today. Well, why don't you introduce yourself and the short that we're going to be talking about today?
So my name is Ben Lankester. I'm a writer-director of a short film called Delivery, a 25-minute drama about a midwife on a night shift as she oversees two pregnancy cases on an understaffed and under-resourced NHS maternity ward.
Yeah, it's a lot. I had to do my makeup this morning after watching the short. And I've watched it, I've watched it a few times. And yeah, you've packed a punch in that. And then I was going back, so I was doing some research. So
Mhm.
we covered you in 2022 on Director's Note, Who's Counting?
Yes.
And Delivery is very much based on that film and came
Yeah.
from that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's very much an evolution from that project. So, to go back a bit, yeah, I work with my wife, my partner, Bo Panny Lunn. She's a producer. The two of us worked we created Who's Counting, the film we're talking about together. That was the first kind of proper short that we did as a duo, I guess. And that was based on our own experiences with miscarriage. So we went to Tommy's charity
Yeah,
and pitched them this idea about this couple going through recurrent miscarriage and how challenging that is, both physically and psychologically. Um, and that film, yeah, we took the idea to Tommy's and um, they came on board and we kind of partnered with them to essentially make a short film, but an impact short, an advocacy short.
yeah,
That they were at the time, Tommy's were able to build that into their campaign that they were running at the time about the fact that women had to experience three losses before they could receive support, which was a kind of crazy thing that was going on at the time,
yeah.
which is still a little bit complicated at the moment, but is definitely getting better.
Hmm.
Um, and that film kind of launched, I guess, our it launched Pan and I into kind of a narrative space. I've been working and still working commercials, but Who's Counting was very much a very deliberate step into kind of narrative work, which is where we want to be.
Yeah,
Uh, and on that project, we met Rosie Chappel, the midwife who would eventually play Mary in Delivery.
yeah.
So Rosie played a very small role in Who's Counting as a nurse.
Hmm.
But I remember being really impressed with her. I mean, it was a very, it was a small role and um, just one line, a few lines of dialogue. But she was brilliant in the role and very well prepared, and she brought a lot of empathy to it.
Yeah.
Um, and I thought to myself, when I kind of saw that she had just qualified as a midwife, I thought maybe there's a story here with centered around a midwife, and I pitched Rosie the idea for Delivery, and that was just over 2 years ago now.
And you had countless Zooms, messages, conversations,
Yeah.
voice notes, everything. How, because it's such an emotive subject, and the job, I have the utmost admiration for anyone who can do that. How were you able to then collate all of that into the narrative form that we see?
Yeah, so the idea was very much to build a story around Rosie's lived experience as a midwife. So with Who's Counting, we combined actors in the main part with real, sonographers, nurses, people in those key roles that allowed us to kind of create that total authenticity to the narrative. And we wanted to
Yeah,
do the same thing with Delivery. And so no better way to do that with Delivery than to build the whole story around a practicing midwife in the lead role. So the process really began with Rosie and I just talking. We were on Zooms. We had a running Google Doc where Rosie would kind of get back from work sometimes and just put some things that happened into the Google Doc.
Mm.
Um, some examples that ended up in the film include well, I'll actually talk about the kind of genesis of the whole kind of, I guess, the genesis of the entire creative approach to delivery was Rosie telling me that when she comes home in the early hours of the evening after a night shift, she can hear the CTG in her head. She can hear that heart monitor,
Yeah.
and that was very much when she told me that. I thought that's the film. That's what
Yeah.
we want to create. That kind of really immersive experience where we want to really get in the head of this character.
Mm.
Um, and um, Rosie would tell me things like that, and they would feed into the script in a very kind of direct way sometimes. She told me about coming home and finding something in her pocket that reminded her of a loss. And again, that goes, that was built into the script. Um, so the process was very much Rosie giving me these kind of nuggets of real life,
Hmm.
and then me finding a way to blend those into the narrative.
Mm.
Um, and from from the perspective of the patients, obviously we have two pregnancy cases that are existing in parallel, side by side, as the story unfolds. The idea with that was very much to show two very different pregnancy cases and two very different outcomes.
Mm.
Um, so, as Rosie would feed me kind of information and anecdotes about her workplace, her interactions with her colleagues, her interactions with the patients, I then would build those into those two narratives. And slowly but surely, the whole thing started to kind of take shape. And from there, it was really just giving the film a structure. We really wanted it to be a 25-minute. It was that was always the plan, to make it
Yeah.
a longer film, a longer short, and for it to kind of almost have that three-act structure and that build and release. That
Yeah.
was very much the intention from the outset.
Yeah. I think you need it. Because obviously you immediately feel for everyone in there, but I think for the journey, it feels like that's exactly how it should be. And then it's also, ending with the just normalcy of her going home to her family,
Yeah, yeah,
which is, a huge part of it as well.
yeah, yeah.
Where did you film? Did you get a hospital?
That was absolutely the most challenging thing.
Yeah, I was watching it and I was like, surely they didn't build that.
Yeah, no, that was the most challenging thing was finding the locations. So the film is pretty much 50-50 split between two locations
Hmm.
in terms of the hospital setting.
Yeah.
It's half in a disused wing of Hemel Hempstead Hospital, which is hired out as a film location.
Okay.
So I'm sure there are some people who have filmed in hospital. It have made hospital set narratives, whether that's a short film or commercials, the TV shows. We know there's a lot of films and shows and ads that have been shot in this location. So it's definitely one that people will recognize when they see the
Yeah.
film. And then we were very fortunate to combine Hemel Hempstead um, with a university hospital in Greenwich. So that's where we filmed the theatre scene,
Yeah.
and various other bits, where Mary comes to have her cry in the drugs cupboard.
Mm.
All the staff room scenes are filmed there. So, when she
Mm.
moves out of the staff room into the corridor, that's a completely different location. So
Okay.
we really were careful to kind of create that one was a very new space and one was a very kind of old space, but we worked hard in the production design to kind of make it feel like a lived-in NHS maternity ward.
Yeah. And I mean, that was something I wanted to talk about. So your DOP, Rachel Clark, because as we all know, hospitals are, for some reason, an insipid green in the UK. They're cold, they're harsh, they're awful. But you bring a life to them in the film, which I thought was really obviously fitting to the story.
Yeah, yeah. Um, there was so many conversations about what color those walls should be.
Yeah.
Because we wanted it, we wanted it to be very neutral. We wanted it to be, generic, really. We wanted it to be to just stand for a UK hospital.
Mm,
There were so many conversations about, the color of the floors, um, and in this actual hospital, those floors happen to be maroon. And I thought, can the floors be maroon? But actually, they often are these odd colors, these very generic kind of colors, and the NHS is this brilliant thing, but obviously it doesn't have endless resources, and so we really wanted to make sure we captured a real that feeling of a real hospital, and so in terms of the color palette, in terms of what we did with um, Rachel, our DP, and Jason Sinnott, our production designer, those conversations were very much around. It was always around authenticity. That was the number one objective.
mm,
And so often it was a case of just leave it. Let's not do too much. Um, let's bring in the equipment we need, which obviously Rosie, as our medical consultant on all of that side of things, as a midwife herself, it was bringing in the right equipment. It was making sure that the details of the lanyards and the badges on the staff around Mary were authentic. It was making sure that the details around the space were really authentic, and
mm.
that detail was there so that the location felt lived in and real.
Yeah. 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 And I assume, and with audiences, a huge part of this film is relatability. And that's it. And sort of seeing those corridors, seeing those walls. Everyone's been in hospitals for some reason or another.
Yeah,
And you get that feeling.
yeah, yeah.
I want to talk to you about sound because
Hmm.
I know Who's Counting. I read that you sort of very much built the film around the sound.
Yeah.
And then in delivery, we start with nothing. It's just, sort of the sounds of the hospital. And then it builds. And then you've got it alongside, the actors' voices and their noises. How was that all built into the pace and into the film?
Yeah, so the objective was always, so yeah, you're absolutely right. To go back to Who's Counting for a second, the idea with that was the music came first. So with my composer on Who's Counting, I created the music so that because I knew I wanted to tell the story backwards,
Mm,
um, and so the music kind of came first. And with delivery, um, the idea, as I said earlier, the this idea that when Rosie, as a midwife herself, comes home and she hears that CTG in her head, that was the creative spark of the entire project.
yeah.
So, from a sonic perspective, a sound perspective, I wanted to make sure that it was as immersive as possible,
Mm,
so that we were really in her head as much as we could, be, and um, that led obviously from a shooting perspective to Rachel being as close as possible to Mary throughout the experience, an entirely handheld camera that was with her,
yeah.
and we were really, really in her point of view. And so, from with the sounds, when Rosie first told me about the CTG in her head when she came home from work, that really led me to approach the entire thing really like a thriller. Like
Mm,
I knew the idea would be that the character would be rushing between each room. And it's around the 8 minute mark that, the shit starts to hit the fan in
yeah.
that hospital.
Yeah.
And from that moment on, it really has to unfold um, in that way that is it's life or death. It's high stakes. It's a race against time. And so I wanted the music and the sound design to kind of be very much one existing element of the film that was in her head, in our head as the audience, and we created kind of three elements to that sound design, and that was the CTG, that original idea of that heartbeat in her head, um, which is obviously the real sound that you hear in that hospital when you've got a healthy or unhealthy heartbeat. So it adds that drama. It has that incredible tension to it. Just that sound of that heartbeat.
Yeah.
And then we wanted to add additional elements, which created this idea of this, this race against time. So we have this kind of slight, subtle kind of ticking element that comes into the music, and then the music. Sarah Warner, brilliant composer, she then created the music around that sound design.
Okay.
But a huge amount of that sound design was done in the edit with my editor. We really created that sound in the edit so that we could um, really be very decisive with our cutting to make sure that it felt as dynamic and as tense and as true to life as possible. And all of
Yeah.
that work was done very early on so
Mm.
that we knew exactly kind of where we were. It wasn't a let's do the sound design at the end. It was very much part of the process in the edit room. To the point where a good example is where Mary comes into the drugs cupboard, and when it all gets too much for her and she has to have a moment on her own, um, and her crying is replaced with the CTG, and she puts her hand on her chest and the CTG sound increases and intensifies. When she went in that room to film that on the day, she had a microphone on her, obviously, and myself and my script supervisor could hear her actual heartbeat, as she was crying, um, and that kind of mix of the shooting, the sound we created on the day and the sound design we kind of put in during the edit process was that was very gratifying to kind of see all those moments kind of come together. But
Yeah.
it was something that the sound was something that we was very much from day one part of the identity of the project.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, obviously from that initial spark and I was talking to another director yesterday, and sound is so important.
Yeah,
I think these days people are they're getting composers and sound design right in at the beginning. It's not an afterthought or anything.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So you were talking about the edit, and that was obviously something I wanted to know about because the pacing of this, it's 25 minutes. As you said, we've got the sort of three structures, but the pacing is relentless but beautiful. Is that a right way to say it?
yeah, yeah. That's really that. Honestly, I think when people are talking to me about the film and telling me what they liked about it, that honestly is the most gratifying thing to hear, because
Mm,
that's the thing that is the hardest thing to do,
mhm.
especially across a 25-minute short, which is long for a short, as we know.
Yeah.
Um, and it was very much, it was very much in the writing that I made sure that though that worked on the page, that it felt like it had that structure.
Mm,
Um, Obviously you never know until you get into the edit room, and there was a few things we did, well, more than a few things we did in terms of moving a few things around. Obviously dropping not we dropped no scenes, but we did drop some scenes. We dropped some scenes, and we did a lot of tightening of dialogue with my brilliant editor, Sasha. He was instrumental in kind of creating that rhythm, and that pacing to the film, and making sure that um, it ebbed and flowed in the right way and didn't
yeah.
become too relentless for the audience, because we know it's a really tough subject matter, and
Yeah.
we didn't want it to be just one roller coaster right to the top, and then to drop off. We wanted there to be these moments of slight levity in there. There aren't many, but they are peppered in there slightly.
And you
Um,
need those. You
you
really
absolutely
do.
you absolutely need those, but with the edit, I'd say as well that the shooting of it, what Rachel did when she shot the film, was instrumental to how we were able to edit it.
Okay.
So, when we would follow Rosie, from the staff room all the way into the patient room. Even though in the film you'll see it cut up, we actually did it all in single takes. So we'd always come and follow Mary, Rosie into the room. She'd interact with the patients, and then she'd leave the room. And we'd do that all as a oneer, essentially.
Hmm.
We knew we weren't going to use it as a oneer, but we did it that way so that um, Rachel could instinctively react to what was going on, and that handheld camera would find um, the parts of the conversation that it needed to find without doing conventional coverage.
Yeah.
So that meant that in the edit, Sasha had these incredible long takes that he was able to then masterfully move between as needed. So that kind of it wasn't just like, oh, here's a close up, let's see what we can do with that. It was that close up that is in the film was part of a longer take that Rachel shot as the scene unfolded. So I think from the writing in terms of making sure that structure was very was really down, and we knew that it worked on the page through the shooting of it and the way Rachel captured it, down to then what that meant Sasha had to work with
Mm.
in the cutting room was all part of the same kind of ambition, really. But yeah,
Yeah.
what Sasha did with the edit is amazing. I mean, he's an incredible editor. He's doing amazing shows on TV, and yeah, he's what he brought to it was what each of these people I talked about brought to it was, I was so lucky to have these amazing collaborators.
Yeah. And that's what you need. I mean, filmmaking, it's a collaboration, it's the team, and
Yeah,
all of these different things come together. No, a film is a sum of all its parts.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So you were talking about audience reactions, and obviously, congratulations on your BIFA,
thank you so
British
much.
Short nomination. Why, why do you think this film has resonated with people, and how do you feel about the nomination?
I feel firstly really proud from the perspective of it being I mean, it was a huge surprise, first and foremost, being on that long list. When Panny and Panny, co-producer, my wife Panny, when the two of us found out we were on that long list, I mean, it was an extraordinary moment in our careers,
Yeah,
an absolute career highlight. Um, Mostly, I'm just so proud that it's a very British story.
yeah,
Um, we thought it was we made it because we thought it was a very important story, an important story that we thought needed to be told. It's a very prescient time for this story to be told, I think, and I think that possibly is why it's really resonating with people. As
yeah,
you said earlier, so many we know what hospitals are like. A lot of people have experience of being inside those hospital walls. A lot of people have experience with having a baby, childbirth.
hmm,
Um, Many with successful outcomes, which is fantastic, but unfortunately, some without those successful outcomes. And I think it, um, whether that happened to you yourself or people that has happened to, I think the themes and the story it really has resonated with people. I think, but yeah, I'm incredibly proud of Rosie. Rosie hadn't acted in something like this before.
wow,
So the whole thing was, you know, I've said this to her. It was a huge risk.
yeah,
It wasn't something that was definitely going to work. Um, but I had faith in her. I had confidence in her, belief in her. But I'm just very proud that we have that the nomination has come um, for a film that is just very much that has been made in this very authentic way, and I think
hmm,
that's what I'm incredibly proud of, and proud of these amazing people that have been part of making it happen as well.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, you sort of career-wise, we've been covering you on DN, for so long, which is beautiful, and it's beautiful to see your progression. How does it feel to you to have been covered, on a site like this from, your work there up until this narrative point?
It feels very special. I remember Marbell interviewing me and my co-director Matt Hopkins on
Yeah,
our feature documentary back in 2016. I remember doing a podcast, I think, with Marbell then, with Matt and
yeah.
Marbell, a long time ago that. Um, and
He was on
then
the vanguard of podcasts.
so it's very special, yeah, to have you guys um yeah, be such advocates for not just me, but all so many filmmakers I know and admire and who are colleagues and friends. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's lovely to be continuing to talk to you about all of these projects. Yeah.
Yeah. And for us as well, and I mean, for me, it's watching filmmakers in their journey, through their filmmaking and watching all their different works and watching it changing. And obviously, you've now moved into narrative, but everyone, I'm a big believer in an authorial voice, and I believe that every filmmaker has that. Whatever genre, whatever they're putting their mind to. So it's such a pleasure to see that journey.
Yeah, and I think I think that's just going back to your previous question about what the nomination feels like. I think it's so gratifying to this was my first proper narrative short film.
Yeah,
Um, the previous one was in partnership with a brand, you know, but then a divorce before marriage, the documentary that we mentioned that you guys covered back in 2016. That was that's where I learned 3 act structure and how to tell a story in over that kind of longer period. So it's so gratifying to kind of feel that evolution, between these projects. And I think yeah, I think that's what directors notes absolutely champion, isn't it? And
yeah,
in terms of seeing that journey kind of come
yeah.
to life through these different
No,
projects.
it's
Yeah.
amazing. So, what's next?
Um, so with delivery, we wanted to first and foremost make a good short film. That was the objective. But we also wanted it to, for Panny and I, and moving in towards our first narrative feature, our first fiction feature, we wanted to have something like this that kind of served as a proof of concept, whether that's for this story, the feature specifically, or whether this works as a proof of concept for something else in the maternity space. Obviously, we've done the last few projects have been in that world, and so we are actively pursuing projects that
Yeah,
are in that world for the feature. Um, there's a book that we've adapted that we're hoping to make as a feature, and we're also talking to people about potentially what delivery of the feature might look like. So that's the that's the next step. Yeah,
God, just as you said that, my emotions, I was like, oh my God, watching a feature of that. Like the 25 minutes is so beautiful and it's so epic. But, and I'm someone that after a film, quite often I just need to sit there and cry for half an hour. But that's beautiful.
yeah, we'll see. We'll see. It's what it might not take the same shape, and that's the challenge and the fun part now is to kind of imagine what shape it might take,
Yeah,
what elements of that of the short we might want to use
yeah,
and we're only going to do it if it's going to do something more than what the short's done, right?
of
We
course.
were only going to
Of course.
do it if we feel that it needs to be made. And I think that's always the driving force behind um, mine and Panny's ambitions. We've set up a new company called Kingdom Born, which is going to be um, the kind of platform for our slate of projects. So
Okay.
through Kingdom Born, we want to um, continue to tell these stories that really feel that we need. We want to continue to tell these stories that we feel need to be told,
Yeah,
and the feature I think will happen if and when we find that reason for it to be told.
yeah, yeah. You need that emotional heartbeat, which sounds
Yeah,
cheesy, but that's what it is.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly that. Yeah.
Well, Ben, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for talking to me.
No,
I've
it's been a
really enjoyed
pleasure.
talking through it.